Another year has passed and another Hottest 100 has been and gone. So let's talk about it. Obviously, the biggest narrative about the new Hottest 100 is that there's once again a higher proportion of Australian music in the countdown than international music, which has understandably been a cause of celebration for a lot of the Australian music industry right now. And before we go into the full stats breakdown, I wanted to just go into a few other things about the countdown. First of all, I wouldn't consider myself a diehard fan of either of these artists, but the fact that Tit for Tat by Tate McRae beat out a Coldplay by Kid Laroi is endlessly hilarious. And I'm so glad that the guy who wants to be the Drake of Australia has inherited his best trait, that is losing fucking beefs. My favourite album of the year got 4 songs in the countdown. I feel so fucking vindicated, you have no idea. I have been following Nina Geraci since 2019. I genuinely do not know the last time a song that was not in English at all made the countdown. I feel like I've only really listened to the Hottest 100 since about 2015, so I can't say before that. But Bad Bunny being on here is actually pretty incredible. And wow, isn't it incredible that Australia has decided to take on the worst aspects of America, including rewarding and voting for alleged pedophiles. So just like the last video, I've linked the Google Sheets file that I've used for a lot of this stats down in the description for this video, if you want to check it out for yourself. And I also have some slight changes in my methodology compared to how Triple J deal with their stats. The 2 most notable examples of this being how I calculate debuts and artist nationality. For the purposes of my stat spread, I tend to only consider the primary artist for these statistics. A good example of this from this year would be Confidence Man and Jade's song Gossip, in which Confidence Man are an Australian electronic duo, while Jade is a former member of British girl group Little Mix. On my statistics as Confidence Man are the primary artist, I've marked the song as an Australian chart, rather than trying to find a way to mark it both as Australian and British. Meanwhile, on the example of debuts, I would point to rank 12 song Victory Lap by Fred Again, Skepta, and Pluck Boy Max. In this case, Pluck Boy Max has never shown up in a Hottest 100, and by Triple J's statistics, that would be a debut. However, for me, it's more a song produced by Fred Again that featured Pluck Boy Max. I explained this last year as well, but it's why I put Sweat You Out My System by Maya as a debut, rather than saying she debuted at number 1 with Say Nothing alongside Flume. The reason I'm explaining this is to explain a small discrepancy that will be in my numbers compared to the Triple J numbers, being that in my numbers, I've said there's only 53 Australian artists and not 54. This is specifically because the song You're a Star featuring Amyl and the Sniffers by Fred Again, in my statistics are labelled as a British release, even if it does feature Australian band Amyl and the Sniffers. Unfortunately, despite the dominance of artists like Olivia Dean and Nina Geraci and G-Flip, we still haven't quite cracked that mark of over 50% of the chart being non-male artists. It was bloody close though. Also, we are continuing to see a rise of Irish artists in the countdown, with Kneecap placing twice in the Hottest 200 this year. What was really interesting to me though about the countdown, it really felt like house music underperformed this year. Fred Again and Dom Dollar didn't manage to crack the top 10 this year. Skrillex was nowhere to be seen after how big a release his album was. The only breakout house artist to crack the top 25 was Disco Lines with his remix of a Tinashe song. With how ever-present artists like Kedema were this year, he only managed to barely scrape into the top 50. The reason that I bring up the fact that EDM placed a bit lower than usual is because of this persistent narrative throughout the year that clubs seem to be dying. The trend of people at clubs not actually dancing and just going to take video of the DJs, and especially stories in Australia where big international artists would come here, like Lil Yachty when he was brought here for Tyler the Creator's Chromacopia tour, and images started circulating of him seemingly bored out of his mind at a Melbourne club. Or Lola Young recently talking on Triple J about going to a club in Brisbane during the 2024-2025 Beyond the Valley and Wildlands leg, and talking about how it was one of the worst New Year experiences that she ever had being in a Brisbane club. I don't know, it's one of those narratives that you see and then you pay attention to in the Hottest 100, and I'm probably projecting that onto this Hottest 100. Speaking of Confidence Man, there were 2 massive Australian debuts of artists who have constantly just missed out on the 100. Sadly, despite being the most Nina Geraci-pilled person in every fucking chat room, I am not talking about Nina Geraci here. I'm talking about Confidence Man finally making their debut after missing out so many times, as well as Parcels finally 3 albums in making a countdown. There were 5 debuts this year that made the top 10, being Olivia Dean taking out the countdown with Man I Need, Member of previous top 10 placing act Peking Duck, Kelly Holiday, making the countdown at number 2 with Dancing To.
Keith.
Somber at number 8 with 12 to 12. And Disco Lines remixing Tinashe at number 9. Also, I love Don West's music. I did not have him picked for a Hottest 100 artist at all. And a little about genres and artists before we move on to just talking about Australians in the countdown. On the Australian side of things, indie rock is once again dominated and is still edging out the pop genre in terms of placements in the list. Funny enough, when we don't take every artist's placement into consideration and just look at each artist at their highest placement in the year, we are actually so close to that 50% milestone of non-male artists in the countdown. Another reason that I bring up the individual artist statistics is this recent article by themusic.com, which I admittedly did not read until after the Hottest 100. They ask whether modern stan culture is potentially ruining the Hottest 100 for newer artists, where they refute this idea. And so as a bit of an experiment, I went back to the Hottest 100 of 20 years ago. The Hottest 100 that famously had Wolfmother get 6 songs in the countdown, a record that wasn't broken until 2023's Hottest 100, with G-Flip getting 7, and then thoroughly smashed again in 2024, where Billie Eilish and Charli XCX both got 8 songs each. And interesting enough, when you actually look at the two side by side, there's only 3 fewer individual artists in 2025's Hottest 100 as there are in 2005's. Wolfmother having 6, and Block Party and Cat Empire both having 4. And then a slew of both Australian and international artists getting 3 or 2 songs in the countdown. What I think is a bit more interesting, it appears there are fewer artists who only ever get about 2 songs in the countdown. There are a lot of artists that are getting 3 or 4 songs in the countdown, and there are still a decent amount who are getting 1 in the countdown. There's a bit more consolidation at the top. I really do think that 2024 was a bit of an outlier. I haven't checked all the online discourse about the Hottest 100 and stan culture. You know, the music did make a really good point. We only started caring about it once pop women broke that record. And also something I didn't notice until recording, there was an even amount of British and American artists this year, which feels surprising. It feels like so much of our pop music dominance comes from America that I hadn't realized quite how much British pop music had really had an impact this year. And now to the part of the list which should make me happy, but doesn't quite. Australia had a much better showing in the Hottest 100 this year than they did last year. Whether you want to say this is because of the Hottest 100 Australian songs of all time or something else, we at least got back around our Australian artists. Big releases by Spacey Jane, that one Tame Impala album that I didn't like, Ocean Alley, Them, Nina Geraci, G-Flip, all made up a huge portion of the countdown. Looking at the artists who got the most songs in the countdown, Olivia Dean was the only non-Australian artist to get more than 3 songs in the countdown. However, despite the Australian indie bands that have an obligatory female bassist in them, we are still seeing major dominance of male-only artists in the countdown. I voted for Keith by Play Lunch. I'm not going to complain about Keith by Play Lunch. I think Keith by Play Lunch is a fucking amazing song. However, having only 9 Australian placements that don't have a single male member, this includes Teen Jesus and the Gene Teasers, by the way, who is marked as mixed because the front person, Anna, is non-binary, is a little interesting, especially given 4 of those female-only acts are Nina Geraci. When you take away all repeated placements of bands, that means you only had 4 fully non-male acts. Nina Geraci, Peach PRC, G-Flip, and Teen Jesus and the Gene Teasers. So from here, I'm not really too interested in doing much more of a statistical breakdown and more what I see happening in Australian music right now. I hopefully want to go into this a bit more in the future, but I feel like we're reaching a critical stagnation point in Australian music right now. Nina Geraci making 4 songs in a countdown is incredible. I will never stop going fucking feral for the fact that Nina Geraci got 4 songs in this countdown and almost fucking made 5 with Info Has It. I want to be proven so wrong on this point. I believe the only reason Nina Geraci did as well as she did in this countdown isn't because of any internal factors in Australian music, be it Triple J pushing her, festival circuit. I believe it's because of external validation. In the same way that Amyl and the Sniffers got 3 songs in the countdown after they received massive validation from international places. Instead, we see a lot of the same artists making in my opinion, shadows of their biggest songs. A lot of Ocean Alley's new albums sounds a lot like Confidence. Spacey Jane is still kind of just riding Booster Seat over and over again. I don't know what's going on with this Tame Impala album. Dracula was the only good song on it. I honestly don't think Kelly Holiday would have gotten this big if it hadn't been for Peking Duck. The outlier in all this really feels like G-Flip, having a non-binary rock star in Australia who keeps reinventing their sound every album and still manages to place this consistently. It throws me for a loop because G-Flip is the outlier in everything that I see with these charts. They don't chart well on the ARIA charts. They don't have international acclaim, but they have a fan base that I still keep underestimating. Every goddamn year that they release music. And this isn't to say that I don't like G-Flip. I like G-Flip's music. Their albums grow on me a lot over the year, but they feel so out of place every year. And obviously, I'm kind of sidestepping Play Lunch's surprising role in this year's countdown, especially given real estate apps made 101 in the hottest 200. But that feels like it's built off one viral moment. And I almost see them in the same place as artists like Tom Cardy and Mash and Kutcher, who were really viral in that year, but were never quite able to back it up after they made their big splash in the countdown. Here's what I find with the countdown. We have Teen Jesus and the Gene Teasers and Peach PRC, who are consistently placing around the same kind of area, showing they have a strong enough fan base to weather any storms that come at them. However, they're still not quite reaching the same kind of heights that they used to. But what I really see is when female artists who have previously dominated the countdown try and reinvent themselves, they seem to be getting rejected. And this isn't just female artists. Genesis Owusu only made the hottest 200 after once again massively reinventing himself for this upcoming album cycle. And maybe once the album drops, there'll be much more hype around him. However, after Struggler swept the ARIA Awards, that still underperformed in that year's hottest 100. Ruby Fields had a massive comeback this year and only made one song in the 200. And for all my wishy-washy feelings on the new Mallrat album, this was a person who has made the top 3 of the countdown before, and none of her songs managed to crack the main countdown. I don't want this next thing to sound like shade at the Tullamarines, but their song Running on Empty, which debuted in the hottest 100, and Sounded Like Summer by Susie, which missed out on the hottest 100, by 40 places, kind of touch on similar themes, as does Real Estate Apps by Play Lunch for that, and yet the male-fronted artist made the countdown, and Susie didn't. Look, I know this is the second time I've gotten into this kind of thing, but I feel like I constantly see this weird bias in which internationally it's the women making the countdown and locally it's the blokes making it. The fact that Julia Stone's side project has never made the countdown, meanwhile Angus Stone's kind of mid-psych rock keeps making it. The fact that Pepper Lane from Spacey Jane's side project has never made it. The fact that there were 3 massive EPs from Australian indie pop artists, Alexia, Lyric, and Darcy Haven, that felt like they had really big fan bases here. And Alexia was the only one to even make the 200. I don't know. I really don't know at this point.